My father would be the first to tell you that 50,000 Dornishmen are worth one rabid dog. That is what Tyrion Lannister says in A Clash of Kings. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the insults hurled at the Dornish people in A Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire. Dornishmen lie, don't they? They're famous for it, says Angu the Archer to Arya as they ride through the Riverland. Or take Jaime Lannister's internal monologue when he's captured. The scum of the earth surrounded them. Swarthy Dornishmen and blonde Lyseni, Dothraki with bells in their braids, hairy Ibonese, coal-black summer islanders in feathered cloaks. Notice how he ranks Dornishmen right alongside foreign mercenaries and raiders, as if they aren't even part of the realm of the Seven Kingdoms. And then there's lazy Leo Tyrell complaining to Samwell in A Feast for Crows. The Citadel is not what it was. They will take anything these days, dusky dogs and Dornishmen, big boys, cripples, cretins, and now a black-clad whale. Why? Why are the Dornish so consistently maligned and held in such contempt by the rest of Westeros? Where does this intense hatred come from? Throughout the books, characters constantly attribute wild, untrustworthy tempers and rampant sexual deviance to the Dornish, while disparaging their land and their culture. It's non-stop. I'd argue that the reason the Dornish are so thoroughly denigrated across Westeros comes down to a very deep, bitter case of psychological sour grapes. Dorne is the only kingdom in the Seven Kingdoms that successfully resisted the Targaryen narrative of conquest. They were never broken. Instead, they forced the Dragon Lords to make peace and eventually joined the realm through marriage and equal alliance. And everyone else hates them for it. But what can we learn from this? And how will this fantasy lore change you? That's what we're diving into today. Welcome back to another episode of Actually, It Is That Deep. If you look on Reddit, there is a whole thread collecting every insult ever leveled at the Dornish in the books. I'll link it in the description. It's a long, ugly list. But to understand why that list exists, why the Dornish are so deeply despised, our first stop must be the psychology devised by Leon Festinger in his theory of cognitive dissonance. In 1957, Festinger argued that human beings experience acute psychological discomfort, or dissonance, when their deeply held beliefs conflict with external reality. When a belief that is tied to your identity gets contradicted by facts, it creates intense internal friction. To relieve that discomfort, people rarely adjust their self-image. It's an illusion to think that you can easily persuade someone out of a core belief using pure evidence. Instead of changing their self-image, people reframe the narrative. They disparage the external truth or rationalize the contradiction so that they can protect their identity. It's not about what's true at that point. It's about preserving who they think they are. So, how does that manifest in Westeros? Westeros suffers from a very specific structural and cultural dissonance. Cognition A is the self-image held by the other kingdoms. The Stormlords, the Reachmen, the Westermen, they all tell themselves we are proud and honourable, invincible martial societies with brave knights and rich military traditions. Therefore, bending the knee to Aegon and his dragons was the only logical, honourable choice. Dragons are an unstoppable force of nature. Surrendering was what we had to do to save our people. Then comes Cognition B, the historical reality that shatters A. Dorne fought the exact same dragons, and they refused to bend the knee. They killed Meraxus. they held off the Targaryens for 2 centuries, and when they finally joined the Seven Kingdoms, they bargained for equal status, retaining their royal titles, which is why the ruler of Dorne is a prince or princess rather than a lord paramount. Clearly, there was a way to resist those dragons. The mighty, honourable Reachmen and Stormlords and Westermen all failed, but the Dornish succeeded. And if Dorne succeeded where everyone else surrendered, it implies that the other kingdoms lacked the grit, the strategy, or resolve to maintain their independence. To protect their own ego, the Marcher Lords, the Tyrells, and the Lannisters must diminish the Dornish victory. Otherwise, their entire self-worth takes a fatal hit. So, they rewrite the story. Dorne didn't win through martial honor, they won through cowardice. Their refusal to stand in the open field and get roasted is framed as unmanly, treacherous. They aren't noble rivals, they're snakes, poisoners. Their integration wasn't a diplomatic triumph. It was an underhanded infiltration of the court of Daeron II. So that's the cognitive dissonance part. But I think we can dig deeper into the philosophy that creates the situation by looking at Friedrich Nietzsche. In his 1887 work on genealogy of morality, Nietzsche outlines how a subjugated or inferior group develops what he calls ressentiment, a psychological state where bitterness over one's own weakness leads to a complete inversion of values. Incapable of direct victory, the resentful group redefines the traits of the winner as evil, savage, or dishonorable, while reframing their own submission as civilized and virtuous. Apply this to Dorne, and you see instantly how Westeros defines honor and why they keep insulting the Dornish. The rest of Westeros operates on a feudal chivalric code: heavy cavalry, formal tournaments, pitched battles. When Dorne ignores this code to survive, using guerrilla tactics against the dragons, the rest of the kingdoms don't praise it as a superior military pragmatism, because to do so would wreck their own ego, their sense of self. Through ressentiment, they reframe Dornish tactics as dishonorable. A scorpion bolt taking down a dragon becomes a cowardly trick rather than being a brilliant defense. Furthermore, Dorne preserved its cultural sovereignty, its gender equality, practicing equal primogeniture where the eldest child inherits regardless of gender, and its sexual freedom. Because the feudal patriarchal rest of Westeros sacrificed that autonomy, they weaponize morality against Dorne. Dornish sexual openness is labeled as wantonness or perversion. Their independence is called barbaric hot-headedness. Nietzsche called this moral projection. The rest of Westeros projects moral flaws onto the Dornish because the Dornish possess a freedom that everyone else surrendered a long time ago. This ressentiment is a deep, festering sore. It creates a desperate need for coping mechanisms where people protect their ego by insisting the problem isn't me, the problem is them. They didn't win because they were better, they won because they're underhanded. I'm still the good guy here. So that's my thesis for why the Dornish are so maligned in A Song of Ice and Fire. But what does that mean for us? Why does ressentiment matter outside of Westeros or in our lives today? Let's bring this into real life. Imagine you've been at a company for 15 years. You put in 60-hour work weeks, you've missed family dinners, you've endured toxic management because you genuinely believe that paying your dues and suffering was the only honorable way to build a career. Then a new colleague comes along. They strictly enforce work-life boundaries. They leverage remote work. They automate their output with modern tools. They negotiate aggressively with management, and they land the exact same promotions you did in 3 years without any of the suffering you endured. Q. The cognitive dissonance. Cognition A. My 15 years of sacrifice were noble and necessary to earn this position. Cognition B. This person achieved the same result in 3 years without suffering, meaning my years of sacrifice were entirely unnecessary. Admitting cognition B causes acute psychological pain. So, to resolve the dissonance without re-evaluating their own choices, the veteran worker maligns the younger colleague. They're lazy. They have no loyalty. They lack work ethic. They cheated the system. Because if they don't say that, they have to face the fact that they endured 15 years of pain for nothing. Or look at creative writing fields like writing, visual arts, content creation. There's an entrenched belief that true artists must suffer and that commercial success outside of traditional channels is illegitimate. When an independent creator bypasses traditional gatekeepers using self-publishing or direct-to-audience platforms, legacy figures rarely say, "Whoa, they built a more efficient distribution model." Instead, they say it's low quality. They didn't earn it the right way. It's just a cheap gimmick. Acknowledging that the gatekeeping system was a trap forces them to admit they wasted decades waiting for permission. Dismissive criticism is the shield protecting their ego from that realization. So, how do we catch ourselves from falling into this trap? How do we stop being full of sour grapes and actually learn from someone else's success? To evade the ressentiment trap, you need to shift from ego protection to personal agency. Firstly, notice the spike of contempt. The trap always begins with a specific emotion. Contempt disguised as moral superiority. When you see someone succeeding through an unconventional path, pay attention to your internal monologue. If you catch yourself thinking, "They didn't earn it the real way," or "must be nice," or "they're just cutting corners," stop. Ask yourself, am I actually angry at their ethics, or am I angry that I didn't think to do what they're doing? Sometimes people are being unethical, and you shouldn't follow them down that path. But often, they just found a more efficient answer to a problem you accepted as unsolvable. Second, separate sacrifice from value. Resolve the dissonance by decoupling suffering from merit. We fall for the sunken cost fallacy of suffering, believing that the pain we endured is what gave our achievement value, all the time. That's the rest of Westeros' delusion. We got roasted in full armor, so our defeat was noble. The modern version of this is, I burnt out working 70 hours a week, so my career is legitimate. But unnecessary pain is not a virtue. And efficiency is not immorality. The path you took in the past was simply a choice based on the knowledge and options you had at the time. It doesn't mean it was the only honorable option. And importantly, it doesn't mean you were dumb for taking that path. It was just the path you took. It doesn't need to define your self-worth. Circumstances could have changed. You could have changed. It's okay. Thirdly, extract the lesson. Nietzsche noted that ressentiment traps you in passive bitterness, watching the other person while doing nothing to improve your own life. And that's what you want to avoid. Instead of bitterness, you want to extract the lesson from their path. You want to move from the trapped mindset of they cheated the system to the extractive mindset of what was the assumption that I was holding that they proved false? What rule did they ignore that I assumed was mandatory? Also, and this is important, acknowledge the trade-offs realistically. No unconventional path is risk-free. It usually comes with social friction or uncertainty or increased financial risk. But ask yourself, can I adopt even 10% of their approach? Can I borrow their boundary setting or their tools to improve my own life? Fourth, and this is important, have a funeral for your sunk costs. Humans are emotional creatures. We make emotional decisions first, and our logical brain spends the rest of its time inventing rationalizations to defend those decisions. If you're feeling deep bitterness because you spent years doing things the hard way, you have to mourn that lost time so you can stop wasting more time defending it. Acknowledge the grief. It hurts to realize you could have done something sooner or more easily. Accept that feeling so that you can move past it. And above all, stop funding the lie. Don't keep suffering just because you've already suffered. You don't need to keep burning in dragon fire just because you've already been singed around the ears. To wrap this up into a quick checklist for everyday life. Notice, catch your immediate urge to diminish someone else's win. Label that contempt with "this is dissonance." Separate. Remind yourself that suffering is not a prerequisite for legitimacy. Pivot. Stop gossiping or moralizing. Ask what assumption the winner broke that you can safely let go of. Safely and ethically let go of. Release. Stop defending your old painful path out of ressentiment. Update your strategy with what you know now. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit the thumbs up button. If you want more analysis on world building, storytelling, and philosophy, I run a free newsletter that comes out 4 times a year. Link is down below. And if you want to hang out right now, go check out my videos on why Soren Kierkegaard is actually the perfect companion read for Jacqueline Carey's Cashel Legacy series. And I'll see you in the next one.